Okay, welcome. Call to order. I will call the Paris Union High School District Special Board Meeting to order at 2:02 p.m. 3.1 Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, I will now take a roll call to establish a quorum. Trustee Anaya?
Here.
Thank you. Trustee Stafford? Will not be here?
No, he's not.
Okay, he'll be absent. Trustee Hall? Here. Thank you. Trustee Garcia?
Present.
Thank you. And Trustee Campos here. So we do have a quorum. 4.1, invitation to address the Board of Trustees on agendized items. Are there any public comments?
There are no public comments.
Thank you so much. 5.1, study session. The Board of Trustees will hold a study session on property analysis follow-up. So Serene from Orbach, Huff, and Henderson will do a presentation. Hello and welcome again, Serene.
Good afternoon, board members, cabinet, and community. Thank you for having me today. Okay, thank you so much. So as you all recall, in January, I gave a presentation on asset management options and opportunities for K-12 school districts. Since that time, we've had a chance to work through and do some reviews of the district-owned properties. And so we're calling this the June update. And what I hope to do today is review a little bit about the asset management study findings that were made with a focus on 2 properties that showed some interesting results, and then a refresher on options and opportunities available to the school district. So if you recall, the last presentation we reviewed surplus property disposition options and alternatives to the surplus process. So today we'll refresh the board's recollection on some of that, and then of course open it up to questions. Any questions on that before I begin? Okay. Here's just a summary of the disposition options we reviewed back in January. This is of course a shorthand version. We've had a lot of detail, and you'll see more detail through the rest of the slides. But what we call surplus property, or under a surplus umbrella, the district would have to proceed under those statutes in order to sell property and to long-term lease for up to 99 years. The interesting thing is that there are opportunities to enter into long-term leases under the alternatives to surplus, but important to note that for the district to sell, it absolutely has to comply with the surplus statute. So we'll go over that again just to refresh everyone on that. The alternatives to surplus primarily cover how to procure short-term leases, long-term leases, what we'll call joint ventures, and then of course the exchange process. Employee housing is also considered an alternative to surplus, meaning you don't have to go through a 7-Eleven committee process and engage in the surplus procedures to consider and approve an employee housing project, but that typically will cover as a separate presentation just because it is pretty involved in what's required, and we can come back with that information. So one of the things that was of note in the asset management study and review of the district properties that we conducted since the last meeting is it appears, at least on the records, that the school district, rather than the city of Paris, owns Panther Park. So you see there's some information relating to that site. It's approximately 5.52 acres, and we've highlighted it there in yellow. Again, jurisdiction within the city of Paris. It does have a multifamily residential zone to it, what they call MFR 14. And its surrounding uses are residential to the north, west, south, and east. Another interesting item that came about, or an interesting information that came about as a result of the asset management study, is that, at least according to property records that were available publicly, the district is still identified as the owner for Vista Verde Middle School, which is, of course, within Val Verde Unified School District boundaries. Just, you see some property information about that, so I'll go through it, but then I'll provide a little bit of background on what's occurred since these discoveries were made.
Don't go put a for sale sign on there, you know what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I wanted to bring the update because it is something that we found, but of course, working with the district team, we're working through how to address that. So approximately 20.06 acres, jurisdiction City of Moreno Valley. You see there the zoning is Moreno Valley Ranch specific plan. And again, surrounding uses, residences to the northwest, south, and east. So of course, these were very interesting to explore further. So working hand in hand with Candace, we've been working through, okay, what is the background? How did we get here? And without getting into all of the detail, we have a summary page here. And sorry if some of the font is a little bit small there. But for Panther Park, again, just reviewing that for the asset management study and the public records that were available, it appeared that the district owns it. In 2003, the district granted...
Wait. Paris Union Heights. Okay, just making it clear because I see PUHSD up there as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that all the Val Verde Unified goes to the Vista Verde Middle School. So for Panther Park, thank you for that and for helping me clarify that. Referring to this district, Paris Union High School District. In 2003, the district granted an easement to the city of Paris for public street and highway purposes, but it wasn't for a fee interest ownership in the property. And as you know, in order for an easement to be granted, the granting entity has to own the property in order to grant that property right to the easement holder. So in order to confirm what's occurred through time, because of course, and Candace, I don't know if you wanted to add some detail now on some of your investigation on this
Panther
one.
Park or Vista Verde?
Panther Park.
Oh, okay.
But just to say that we have obtained a proposal to do a chain of title review to understand how we got here. Why is this school district, Paris Union, identified as the owner? And I know also on a parallel
She just sent it to me.
Okay. Yeah, that Candace has
Oh,
been,
1 minute ago.
has done some investigation as well. So I'll turn it to her for that.
Do you want me to come here for?
However you want to do it.
Just so it goes on the record. So on Panther Park, and actually Sochi was a good help here too in going through old district records, and this document that Serene mentioned in 2003, the easement that was granted to the city for highway and different access points there. Sochi actually found in, I guess you could say, a mislabeled file, folder in old superintendent's office, records. We all had to take allergy medicine after, going through these files. But as you heard us kind of talking offline and online, they've obtained a proposal, and so we would like to review that, and then depending upon the parameters of it, enter into that so that we can do that chain of title, so that we can really understand both us and the city. And at this point, the county records do indicate that we own it, so I would argue, which will be different when we get to Vista Verde, it should be a cost of the district to do that research, whereas Vista Verde would be a different situation. Is that all you want me to say?
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want me to just stay right here for Vista Verde?
If you want
to get it started.
Sure.
So, is there like a time limit for, even though they're talking about an easement from the city of Paris for the streets, is there like a time frame, this agreement, contract, whatever it's called, the duration period? Is there anything like that?
For the easement,
Or is it just indefinitely
yeah,
X?
for the easement, it's indefinite, but
Okay.
and because it's for a public benefit.
Right.
But if for the ownership, there wouldn't be typically. unless there's some things we haven't seen. But that's exactly why I think it's important to get the chain of title information and do that review. And so I think just importantly, whenever there is this type of discrepancy, it's good to start with the district's records and just see what the district has. And I know the district team worked very diligently to see what they had in their both records and archives, and then come up with a plan and move forward from there, because of course, given the sensitivity of it. And
Thank you.
So on Vista Verde Middle School, so Serene and her team have been working on what they affectionately refer to as a binder, but it's not like, if it were printed out, it might be several volumes, would you say? So it's all of our property data, but they provided that to me as a draft so that I could take, a first look at it. I've provided some comments back. Some of those things would just be, how we refer to things here. As an example, Choice 2000 Charter School was no longer operable, but it was at the same, complex or facility as a CMI, just one. So we were just trying to make sure it was, very clean and, ready, to become, a final document. So as I'm going through there, I'm going, Vista Verde Middle School, what the heck? And, and she's got all of the documentation there that shows Paris Union High School District as the owner there. And I do remember saying to her on a conference call one time, I said, when you stood here in, what was it, January, and you said, districts are always surprised when we do this analysis and they find out they have properties they don't own. In my head, hopefully outwardly, I wasn't shaking my head going, that's not gonna happen. Well, and then, here it happened. So, so the next steps that I took was, well, first to go to Sochi and to Anna to see what the superintendent's office may have, back to those dusty old files, in terms of the unification documents. Another step that I took parallel to that was actually to contact Dr. Fred Good, because he's got a lot of facilities history, not just in our district, but he was the former superintendent of the Val Verde School District. And man, Fred, Hector and I can both attest to this, that guy has got a memory like no other. And so he's telling me, and he's like, oh no, and I don't even remember now, so that compares my memory to his CFD number such and such back in 1993. Val Verde Elementary was the lead agency for Paris Union, was a party to it, and that's how Paris Union bought that property, but it transferred to Val Verde when it became a unified district. Okay, great. That's what we all assumed happened when a unification takes place. So back to the files, what can we find? Didn't really find anything, unfortunately, that helped us. We found a lot of interesting data, a lot of interesting history, about the district and about, back when Lake Elsinore and Temecula and Val Verde were not unified, but we couldn't find what we were looking for. So I contacted Garrick Owen, who holds the same position as me in the Val Verde School District, and that's when I joked and said, don't put the for sale sign up yet, because I told him this, I showed him the data that OHH had pulled, and he was surprised, by this too. I contacted Riverside County Office of Education to see what unification documents, they may have, because they have oversight for the county committee, school district reorganization, or organization of reorganization. And so through that process, Garrick and his team actually were able to produce a document that shows the deed was in fact transferred, or the title was in fact transferred from Paris Union to Val Verde in the year Fred said it happened. And it's got the little, the stamp on it that says it was recorded properly, right, but it wasn't recorded properly. So we're working through those steps. So we were talking just a few minutes, you may have noticed before the presentation started, and Garrick and Serene and I are now looped into one email so that we can continue sorting this out. Unless I'm directed otherwise, I plan to tell Garrick these are your costs to absorb in terms of otherwise the records say it's our property. So, and of course I'll say that in a nice way. So that's, did I miss anything?
Just that they've started, and I think you mentioned this, Val Verde has started and contacted ARCO to start working through some of the transfer process, at least so the records reflect the accurate ownership now, which of course through the unification process is with Val Verde, but it just takes time for that to reflect in the records that are available publicly when we search. So we know that's in process. We searched it right before this meeting. It still does not show them as the owner yet.
Does it still show their address though now?
It does show their
Okay,
address.
so part of it's changed.
Yeah, so waiting for that to occur, and of course, I think just, it's a little bit of a process just for the county record system to catch up to what's happening in real time.
And I forgot one other piece, I'm sorry to jump back to Panther Park. One of the things that we found that was interesting, that I actually found before we engaged Serving, to do this after that January meeting. Panther Park, while the district is listed as the owner, the address is a residential address in Sun City. So that will be an important component to this title history search. I don't even have a hypothesis for that.
Hopefully the chain of title will clear that up a little.
Is there a property tax paid on that, or we don't pay
No,
property
we don't
tax on?
have
Oh, okay.
taxes, no.
Now, are you talking about Panther Park, or are you talking about?
Well, both of them.
Thank you.
We don't pay any property taxes.
Nobody does, right?
No,
Oh,
well,
okay.
not nobody does, but school districts do not.
Okay.
So, any questions on any of that? I know that's a lot of information to absorb.
So basically, it's ours, but not ours. It's theirs.
Well, for Vista Verde.
Yeah.
And then for Panther Park.
Right.
Working
Okay.
through the records to confirm where we are.
Perhaps I was hoping we had another middle school, but.
We just can't operate it because it's out of the area.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, so the rest of the presentation really does go through again and provides a refresher on what we covered in January. And I think given, that we've assembled what the district properties are, which of course now we've highlighted the couple that were interesting case studies and came out of that report. But just wanted to, again, refresh the board on what the options and opportunities are, and if there are any questions based on the presentation, happy to take those. So, what is typically required, and you'll see in the further slides, when we say post-committee recommendation, that's referring to a 7-Eleven committee. And so in order for a school district to surplus property, you require recommendations from a 7-Eleven committee. And that's what we call a Brown Act committee that's formed by the board that holds public meetings and receives information for the sites that are under their purview. And it's up to the board to determine which sites they would be reviewing. And then, and you'll see in the further slides, and then what their primary role is to make a recommendation to the board in the form of a recommendation report about can the property be deemed surplus? Are there alternative uses that the board should consider? And then, of course, the board would take action based on the recommendation or not. It's completely up to the board's determination at that point. But in order for property to be deemed surplus, the board has to approve a resolution deeming it so. And then you probably recall from the January presentation, there are a couple different steps that kick in. So one is the public offering process, where the property is offered to public agencies first. They get a right of first refusal. And there's a certain time frame within which they would provide and show their, either in writing or reaching out directly to the district to express interest in the property. They are not offered the property at less than fair market value, so it is an arm's length negotiation just like any other buyer. There are circumstances where if the property is primarily, or at least in some portion, comprised of recreational property or playfields, that you would have to analyze it under the Naylor Act. And the Naylor Act does have a calculation for less than fair market value and allows recreational agencies to acquire it for less than fair market value. So that is a distinction. But in terms of the regular public agencies that would get notice that are non-recreational under the Ed Code, they do not receive a less than fair market value consideration or discount unless that's what the district wanted to consider. And then there would be a formal bidding procedure. So what the formal bidding procedure here contemplates is that the board would receive offers for the property and what we would call bids in an open session meeting. And there would be a resolution 1 that provides the community with information about when the board will be receiving those offers and what the procedure will be for that. And then there'll be a second meeting where the bid opening occurs. What we've been seeing more and more these days, and what we covered back in January, is that many districts are seeking waivers of either the public offering and public bidding or public bidding procedures because they want more flexibility on how to dispose of their properties. And primarily what the request is in those documents is to either for the district to be able to put the property out on the open market for sale or lease, using a real estate broker or however the district chooses to do that. Or number 2, to do a request for qualifications and proposal process to sell or lease the property. So those are options that are available. The State Board of Education would have to approve that, and typically the State Board of Education will provide what they call conditional approval. So they'll have in that letter what the district has to abide by in order to get this flexibility. So that's just a refresher on surplus. I just wanted to provide a little bit of information on who is supposed to be represented on a 7-Eleven committee. Similar to a Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, there are certain groups that have to be represented. So you have to have one representative from each of the categories you see there, including business community, teachers, landowners or renters. You can have up to 11 members sitting on the committee. So once you assign a member that fits each of those categories, then the other ones can be at large. And we covered this a little bit already, but the primary purpose of the 7-Eleven committee is prior to the board being able to take action on surplusing, a recommendation report is submitted by the 7-Eleven committee. So their primary task is to receive information from the district team and work up that recommendation report for the board, and then it's presented to the board, and the board receives it and then takes its next steps from there. And then typically what we see is that districts hold about 4 to 6 meetings per site. Of course, there can be more than one site at a time under a 7-Eleven committee's review, but just wanted to provide that meeting estimate because we do get that question pretty often. And here again, some of this will look familiar because we did review this in detail at the January meeting, but these are the alternatives to surplus. I'm going to breeze through these slides, but this joint use option here is for shorter term leases. So again, the district would procure short-term leases and allow a lessee to lease its space on a short-term basis under these statutes, which are the joint use statutes. Importantly, there is a public entity exception to the fair market rent rule under these statutes, but districts are encouraged and under the statutes required to pursue fair market rent for joint use leases. And of course you see there at the bottom that prior to entering into the joint use lease agreement, the board must make the 3 findings, and it's primarily focused around if there's a portion of a school site that's being leased, that use of the site is not interfering with the regular usage of the school, the remainder of the school site. So you see there interfere with educational programs, unduly disrupt the residents of the neighborhood, or jeopardize the safety of the children in the school. Joint occupancy, so what we covered under the surplus statutes is there is an opportunity to pursue long-term leasing under the surplus statutes. Outside of that, it would be the joint occupancy statutes that would govern. So under Ed Code 17515, through an RFQP process, the district can seek developer proposals to develop a site. And this can be for a public-private partnership. That's really, I think, joint venture is what it's primarily geared towards. We have done public-private partnerships, so where the school district has teamed up with another public agency to provide both their sites for development with a developer. So there are very many different ways that you can operate under these statutes. the standard here that the district would use for selecting the proposal, of course, after going through a procurement process, is that best meets the needs of the district. So unlike, let's say, with construction processes where it would be a low bid, or under the surplus sale procedures where it would be the highest price, here there's a lot of flexibility. It's best meets the needs of the district. So if there was a recommendation from the district team of which proposal to pursue, the resolution and report agenda items would have all of the rationale for why that particular proposal stood out, so that the board has the information to make the selection. And importantly, it does allow for up to a 99-year lease term. Fee generating statutes, we covered these. Primarily these are used for billboard projects, and I know we talked about that back in January, but just wanted to remind the board that this is also an option and opportunity for school district sites and procuring leases. And this offers a maximum term of up to 35 years and does require an RFQP process, request for qualifications and proposal process. The Community Recreation Act, this is primarily geared towards districts and cities working hand in hand on development projects. So for example, if there's a pool project or a performing arts center that the school district wants to consider developing with a city sister agency, it could be under these statutes. It does not limit the term of the lease under the Community Recreation Act. Recreation is defined broadly under these statutes. So that's why I gave the example of the Performing Arts Center, because recreational, you typically think sports related. But no, it can be beyond that. Even libraries fall within the purview of that definition. And then lastly, the exchange process. Again, the district can exchange its property for another property. Where we see this often is, for example, if the district wants a more upgraded warehouse facility or transportation yard or something along those lines that's more of an administrative use, that it would take time for the district to go out and find and work through updating its own facilities, both the cost and just depending on how long ago the district's facilities were built. Oftentimes when you do the analysis, the cost-benefit analysis, it makes more sense to exchange the district site for another site that's already built for the district's needs. And what can occur in these circumstances, which is very helpful, is if there is a certain need that the district has and it's getting interest from a developer or a group that wants to potentially exchange property for district property, the district can work and say, these are the specs, this is the type of property that we want to exchange into, can you please go out and find it? Then come back to the table and let's have a fair negotiation of our property for the property that would benefit us. And then of course, both properties would be valued, and you would go through the same procedures as if you were purchasing property or selling property. So you would have to do all the due diligence that's required for a purchase and sale transaction. And then lastly, just reminding the board of the use of proceeds, that you have the most flexibility with lease revenue. It's may be used in any way the board directs. So typically what school districts like to hear is that lease revenue can go to the general fund and for those types of uses. And then of course for sale, which is under the surplus statutes, that's the most restricted. And I'm sure Candace can provide a lot more specific information about that, but typically the shorthand version is that it can only be utilized for capital outlay or for costs of maintenance of school district property, as opposed to becoming more general fund and used more broadly for district uses.
And I did a follow-up presentation, so they have all of that information, I think, in March.
Okay, great. And that is the end. So I will turn you over to the board for questions.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's clear for me.
I'm good.
I guess the one, and I'm pretty sure, I think I remember the answer. So for us in this particular situation, does it benefit us to kind of move into some type of action to see what we're going to do with Panther Park, or do we just, is it best maybe just to sit on it and kind of see, or, I mean, I know you guys probably can't give certain type of advice, but I mean, just so that we know, because we don't know, like, okay, so we have that now, what do we do with it? Like,
So typically how we'll proceed if there's surprising information that's discovered through an asset management study is exactly the examples we gave, right? So for the district team to do their legwork to see what you have in your records, to compare against what's publicly available. We do really want to dot our I's and cross our T's and do our due diligence. So I think a really important next step is getting the chain of title. Of course, we'd have to review it.
Right.
Sometimes there are errors in what the title company provides. So we go through that with a fine-tooth comb. And then depending on what the information shows, bring recommendations for how to either cure it or develop a plan for next steps. And I think it's really going to depend on the information that we find.
So you guys don't need direction to work on that title? You'll already do that?
Yeah, I think just approval from Candace, which she's already granted, but I think she's looking at the amount of the proposal, which was just sent to her.
I was actually reviewing that while we were
Yeah.
sitting here. I sent Garrick's part to him, and it's actually really reasonable. It was like $250 per document
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
He's got that in his pocket. I've seen.
You've seen, I'll let him know.
Yeah.
so now, the part you mentioned with like public entities, so let's just say if we at some point wanted to consolidate kind of, because we have different offices, for different departments within the organization, then there's this building that maintains or houses most of them. But if there was city property that, let's say we wanted to consolidate and move into a bigger, house everybody under one area that had a bigger, property, could we then negotiate with like the city to say, hey, if they're not using a piece of land, to either like make an offer to kind of say, hey, we would like this for this specific use, and then kind of in exchange, or I don't know if we could use Panther Park as a negotiating piece of real estate or property. I mean, I'm just kind of, my mind's like, I don't even know if like what I'm asking is legal or possible, but just like
Like you're saying, if the city wanted to hold an event, they could use Panther Park?
a trade. Well, no, but I'm saying like they could, let's just say there's an area somewhere that is not being used by the city, and then kind of like that whole, I guess not the easement thing, but they're not using it, and then we need it for our needs to, let's just, because if we consolidate it, let's just say we put everybody under one building, but we can't do it here, but there was a property that the city had, and then we can get, fair market value or something like that, because then that might release us to have a larger property open and available for any one of these options. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I think depending on what the information shows that we develop and are able to confirm, I think then there are some options for negotiating with the city to clear up, whether they have they are going to say they have an ownership claim to Panther Park, but how the district and city can negotiate to work through that, and that benefits both sides.
Okay. All right, yeah.
Good to go?
Yeah, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a safe drive back.
Thank you.
Okay, 6.1 adjournment, special meeting of the Board of Trustees for June 2nd, 2025. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Trustee Garcia. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Trustee Anaya. Please vote. Or if there's no other discussion, please vote.
Oh, here we go.
On a vote being taken, we've got 4 in favor and 1 absent. This meeting is adjourned at 2:37.